The funds were legally withdrawn to repay the guaranteed business loan. That was everything. Miss Uwimana, you're a Kana. There must be some mistake.
Stop crying, Aline. You signed the guarantee yourself.
Losing everything is your fault, not your brother's. I trusted you because you were my family.
Every cent had been seized to repay a business loan she had guaranteed for her own brother. The deepest wound wasn't losing the money. It was realizing that the people she loved believed her sacrifice was simply expected. What would you do if you were Aline? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Every day in Aline Uwimana's life began before sunrise. While most of the Nyamirambo neighborhood in Kigali was still covered in cold morning mist, the small tin-roofed house where she lived was already lit. The soft sound of boiling water mixed with the early birds outside, creating one rare moment of peace before the day began. Aline tied back her hair, wrapped a turquoise kitenji scarf around her shoulders, a scarf she had woven with her own hands, then quietly prepared ginger tea and millet porridge for her mother. It was a habit that had lasted nearly 10 years ever since her father died from a stroke while working the night shift as a security guard. Before closing his eyes, he held his daughter's hand and whispered, "You do not have to carry the whole world, but if you can, keep this family together." Aline never forgot those words. But over the years, she accidentally turned them into a burden much heavier than he ever meant them to be. After placing breakfast on the table, Aline rode her old bicycle to the hand-weaving workshop where she rented a small corner to work. The road through Kimironko Market was already busy by 5:30. Vendors selling bananas, sweet potatoes, and fresh flowers greeted her with familiar smiles. They all knew Aline as the hardest working woman in the neighborhood. Even on days when heavy rain flooded the streets up to her ankles, she still arrived on time. Even when she had a fever, she swallowed a few tablets and sat back at her loom. No one had ever heard her complain about her life. The workshop was not large, only a little over 30 square meters, but Aline kept every corner neat. Rolls of colorful thread were arranged carefully on wooden shelves. Kitenje fabrics with traditional Rwandan patterns hung neatly to avoid dust. She believed that anyone who worked from the heart had to treat their workplace with respect. Every morning before she began weaving, Aline placed her hand on the wooden loom for a few seconds, as if thanking the work that had fed her for so many years. Solange Uwera, her closest friend and a lawyer at an office nearby, stopped by as usual. She brought 2 warm mandazi and a cup of black coffee. Solange looked around the workshop and smiled. "You are the first one here again." Aline smiled back. "If I arrive late, the orders will not finish themselves." Solange placed the coffee on the table and looked at her friend with both admiration and concern. "Do you know what I admire most about you?" "What?" "You always think of other people first." Aline gave a small shrug. "Maybe because I am used to it, and that is also what worries me most." Aline only smiled softly and did not answer. She had heard Solange say that many times before, but in her mind, family was always worth sacrificing for. Near noon, Aline's phone began to ring. The name on the screen was Bosco Nindaisaba. Her brother rarely called during working hours unless he needed help. Aline took a deep breath before answering. "I'm listening." Bosco's voice sounded strangely excited. "Aline, I have good news. I just found a partnership opportunity with a friend in Musasan. This time, it will definitely work." Aline stayed silent for a few seconds. She still remembered how 2 years earlier, Bosco had opened a coffee shop that closed after only 6 months. Last year, he tried selling second-hand phones and failed again. Each time, she was the one who paid the small debts left behind. "I'm happy for you. I just need a little more time." You are not going to ask what I need." Aline smiled sadly. She had already guessed the rest of the call. "What do you need?" Bosco laughed. "Not much. I just want to meet you tonight to discuss something." "All right, you are the only one who understands me." The call ended. Aline placed the phone down, but her hand remained on the table. Solange had witnessed everything and quietly shook her head. "Again, it may just be a conversation." "Do you really believe that?" Aline did not answer. Instead, she returned to the loom and continued passing each thread back and forth with careful rhythm. But this time, her hands moved slower than usual. That afternoon, while delivering a batch of scarves to a souvenir shop near central Kigali, Aline unexpectedly received a compliment from a foreign customer. The woman held up one scarf, gently touched every woven line and asked in slow English, "Who made this?" "I did." "Never give up your work." Things made with patience always carry lasting value. Those words kept Aline smiling all the way home. She did not know that only a few hours later, a conversation inside her own house would begin the biggest storm of her life. The small Uwimana family home glowed under warm yellow lights. The aroma of stewed beans and roasted plantains filled the kitchen, but the atmosphere around the dinner table felt heavier than usual. Mama Esperance kept placing more food onto Bosco's plate as though he was still a young man in his early 20s. Bosco wore a brand new dress shirt and a shiny wristwatch Aline had never seen before. She quietly pulled out her chair, sat down, and let her eyes rest briefly on the expensive watch before lowering them to her plate. Bosco was the first to speak. "What do you think of my watch?" Aline offered a polite smile. "It's nice. A friend gave it to me. They believe in me, so they decided to invest with me." Aline asked no further questions. Over the years, she had learned that whenever Bosco started talking about great opportunities, a request she did not want to hear usually followed. Mama Esperance looked at her daughter with a warm smile. "I told you, didn't I? Your brother has finally found people who recognize his potential." Bosco immediately continued, "This time is completely different." "How is it different?" "I'm about to launch a coffee distribution business supplying hotels in Kigali and Muzans. My partner already has reliable suppliers. I only need working capital for the first few months." Aline gently set down her spoon. "It sounds like a fairly large project." "It's really not," Bosco smiled confidently. "But the profits will be excellent." He pulled a folder from his leather briefcase and placed it on the table. Inside were neatly printed business plans and colorful charts. Mama Esperance looked at the documents with hopeful eyes even though she barely understood the figures. Bosco slid the folder toward Aline. "Take a look." Aline carefully read every page. The proposal looked professional, but several important details were missing, including confirmed purchase contracts, cargo insurance, and payment terms. What caught her attention most was the final line: business loan, 18,500,000 Rwandan francs. She looked up. "You're planning to borrow from the bank?" Bosco nodded. "Yes. What does the bank require?" He hesitated for a moment. "Just one guarantor." The room suddenly became so quiet that the ticking clock on the wall sounded unusually loud. Aline exhaled softly. "You want me to guarantee the loan?" Bosco leaned forward immediately. "It's only a formality. I already have customers lined up. I'll pay everything back within a few months." Aline did not answer right away. Her mind drifted to the weaving workshop she had spent years planning. Hidden inside the drawer of her bedroom was every franc she had saved through thousands of woven scarves, hundreds of traditional garments, and countless sleepless nights completing customer orders. In only a few more months, she would finally have enough to rent a larger workspace. Mama Esperance gently held her daughter's hand. "Aline, yes, his mama. You're the only one in this family with a strong credit record. I know, I'm not forcing you." She paused before speaking again. "But if our family doesn't help Bosco, who will?" Bosco lowered his head, his voice becoming quieter. "I never wanted to ask you. I truly have no other choice." Aline looked at her brother for a long moment. She remembered how, when they were children, Bosco had carried her across flooded roads so she could get to school. She remembered him giving her the last roasted sweet potato when food was scarce. Those memories had always convinced her that deep inside, Bosco was still a good brother who simply had not yet found the right path. Just then, Aline's phone vibrated. It was Emmanuel Habimana. She excused herself and stepped outside onto the front porch. "Have you had dinner?" Emmanuel asked. "Yes, you sound tired." Aline looked up at the star-filled Kigali sky. "Bosco wants me to guarantee his loan." Silence filled the other end of the line. "How much?" 18.5 million Rwandan francs. Emmanuel took a slow breath. "That's no small loan, I know. Have you read the contract?" "Not yet." "Don't sign anything tonight." Aline leaned against the wall. "He says it's just paperwork." Emmanuel answered calmly. "No bank calls a personal guarantee, just paperwork." If the borrower cannot repay the debt, the guarantor becomes responsible. "Do you think Bosco will fail?" "I don't know," he paused, "but I do know one thing. What? Someone who truly loves you will never ask you to risk your entire future just to prove your love for them. P. His words echoed in Aline's mind long after the call ended. When she returned to the dining table, Bosco was still waiting. Aline. P. Mama Esperance also looked at her with hopeful eyes. No one pressured her. No one raised their voice. Only heavy silence filled the room. Finally, Aline closed the folder. P. I'll go to the bank with you tomorrow. Bosco immediately looked up. Really? Yes, but before I sign anything, I want to read the entire agreement. P. Bosco jumped to his feet and hugged his sister tightly. I knew it. I knew you wouldn't abandon me. Mama Esperance smiled with visible relief. P. Only Aline remained quiet, her eyes resting on the folder lying on the table. For reasons she could not explain, an uneasy feeling settled deep inside her heart, as though something unseen was already waiting just ahead. P. That night, before going to bed, Aline opened her savings book and gently ran her fingers across the balance she had spent nearly a decade building. P. Happy. She told herself that this was only one signature to help her brother get back on his feet. She had no idea that this very signature would become the turning point that changed the course of her life forever. P. On a Monday morning, Aline Uwimana walked into a bank branch in downtown Kigali with a completely ordinary state of mind. P. She was simply there to transfer the deposit for the workshop she had dreamed of opening for nearly 10 years. The property owner had agreed to hold the space until noon. For Daniela, if everything went as planned, by the beginning of the following month, she would finally have a weaving workshop of her own, instead of renting a tiny corner. Inside her Kitenje shoulder bag were a notebook filled with business plans, the layout for her future workshop, and the fountain pen her father had once used to sign his very first employment contract. She always carried it whenever she was about to begin an important new chapter in her life. The bank teller smiled as she accepted Aline's card and began typing. Only a few seconds later, the smile disappeared. The woman stared at her computer screen before looking up. Could you please wait a moment? Aline looked puzzled. Is something wrong? I need to verify a few details. About 3 minutes later, a branch manager stepped out from the office and politely invited Aline into a private meeting room. Mrs. Uwimana, first of all, I am truly sorry. Aline felt her heart sink. What happened? The manager turned the computer monitor toward her. Your savings account has been used to fulfill your legal obligation as the guarantor of a business loan signed on March 14. Aline stared at the numbers displayed on the screen. Current balance, 187 Rwandan francs. She thought she had read it incorrectly. That can't be possible. Mr. Bosco Ndaisabazi's loan has been overdue for several repayment periods. He told me he was making the payments. We sent 3 formal notices. 3 notices to the registered address. Aline slowly shook her head. I never received anything. The manager opened the file. The notices were mailed to the address provided by the borrower. Aline lowered her eyes. It was Bosco's previous address. He had moved out nearly 4 months earlier. No one had informed the bank. The manager gently placed a copy of the loan agreement in front of her. Clause 12 states that if the borrower fails to repay the loan, the bank has the legal right to recover the outstanding balance directly from the guarantor's assets. Aline's hands began to tremble. That was the very page she had barely glanced at the night she signed, because Bosco had kept reassuring her. Don't worry, it's only a formality. She sat silently for nearly a full minute. She did not cry. She did not raise her voice. Her mind simply went completely blank. 9 years of waking before dawn. Years of refusing to buy new clothes. Simple meals of beans and sweet potatoes to save money. Countless nights now working until 2 in the morning to finish customer orders. Everything had disappeared. So, all of the money is gone? The manager nodded gently. We were required to leave only the minimum balance permitted under banking regulations. Aline stared at the figure. 187 Rwandan francs. It was not even enough to buy a loaf of bread. She stood up, thanked the manager politely, and walked out of the bank. The Kigali sunshine was just as bright as it had been every other day. But for the first time in many years, she had no idea where to go next. At 9 a.m., her phone rang. It was the landlord who had agreed to rent her the new workshop. Mrs. Aline, I'm still waiting for the deposit. Aline closed her eyes. I'm sorry, has something happened? I can't transfer the money today. The man remained silent. I turned away 2 other tenants because I trusted you. P. I understand. If I don't receive the payment before the end of today, I'll have to rent it to someone else. I understand. The call ended. P. In just a few minutes, the dream she had worked toward for nearly 10 years slipped away. That afternoon, Aline went to Bosco's apartment. The door was locked. P. A neighbor told her he had moved out the previous week. He had left no forwarding address. She called him. The first call, no answer. The second call, rejected. P. On the 5th attempt, Bosco finally answered. Aline, I'm in a meeting. Where are you? What happened? The bank just emptied my entire savings account. P. Silence. Nearly 10 seconds passed before Bosco finally spoke. I'm trying to fix everything. You knew this would happen. I Bosco's. Her voice remained surprisingly calm. P. You knew before today, didn't you? Bosco sighed heavily. I was going to tell you later. After every cent was already gone, I didn't want you to worry. P. Aline gave a tired smile. I have nothing left to worry about. Please, give me a little more time. How much a few months? P. The bank just took everything I spent 9 years saving, Aline. How much longer do you expect me to wait? Bosco had no answer. P. He quietly said, I'll call you back. Then he hung up. That afternoon, Aline returned home in silence. Mama Esperance was watering flowers in front of the house. P. When she saw her daughter, she smiled warmly. Did you sign the lease for your new workshop? Aline looked at her mother for a long moment before quietly placing the bank statement on the table. P. Mama Esperance read every line. The smile slowly disappeared from her face. How? How could this happen? The bank took everything. She collapsed into her chair. P. Bosco told me everything was under control. No, Aline gently shook her head. Nothing has been under control for a very long time. P. For the first time in years, the house remained completely silent during dinner. Only the ticking of the old clock echoed through the room. P. In one corner, the notebook containing the plans for Aline's dream workshop still lay untouched on the table. No one reached for it. P. And later that same evening, just when Aline believed she had lost everything, her phone rang. It was a call she had never expected. P. A call that would quietly open a new door, just as she thought every door had already closed. The following morning, Aline Uwimana woke up just as she always did. P. Her alarm rang on time, but for the first time in nearly 10 years, she sat motionless on the edge of her bed for almost 5 minutes. P. Outside her window, the Kigali sky slowly shifted from grey to soft gold. The familiar sounds of bread vendors and the first buses of the day filled the streets as though nothing had changed. P. Only Aline knew that her life was no longer the same. She walked into the kitchen and prepared breakfast for her mother. P. Mama Esperance sat quietly in front of a cup of tea that had long gone cold. The exhaustion on her face revealed another sleepless night. I'm sorry, her mother whispered. P. Aline stopped what she was doing. What are you apologizing for? If I hadn't always defended Bosco. Aline gently placed a bowl of porridge in front of her. P. Please don't blame yourself, but you loved your son. That wasn't wrong. She sat down across from her mother. P. But sometimes loving someone too much prevents them from learning how to take responsibility. Mama Esperance lowered her head. P. It was the first time she had ever heard her daughter speak about Bosco in such a calm voice. There was no anger, no bitterness. P. But there was no longer any excuse for his behavior either. After breakfast, Aline went to the weaving workshop as usual. P. The road through Kimironko Market was busier than normal as people prepared for the upcoming artisan festival. Familiar faces greeted her warmly. Aline, don't forget to bring your new scarves next week. P. Customers kept asking about your work. We're saving a booth for you. She smiled politely at everyone, but deep inside she knew she no longer had enough money to buy more materials. P. The remaining thread in her workshop would only allow her to complete 3 more customer orders. After that, production would have to stop. At exactly 9:42 a.m., P. While carefully finishing the final stitches on a deep red scarf, her phone rang. An unfamiliar number. She hesitated for a moment before answering. Hello, this is Aline. P. A calm female voice replied. Good morning, Ms. Uwimana. My name is Claudine Mukamana. Aline frowned slightly. I'm sorry. Have we met before? No. The woman smiled gently. P. But I've seen your work. Aline looked surprised. Where? At a hotel in Kigali. One of your woven decorative scarves was displayed in the reception area. P. Aline immediately remembered the commission she had completed 8 months earlier. Claudine continued, "I own Mukamana Collection, a chain of handcrafted African fashion boutiques." Aline recognized the name instantly. Mukamana Collection was well known across Rwanda, Uganda, and Kenya for working with local artisans and promoting traditional craftsmanship. "I'd like to meet you. When? If you're available." 10:30 this morning. Aline glanced at the unfinished thread on her loom. "I'll be there." Right on time, Aline walked into a small cafe overlooking KN4 Avenue. Claudine was already waiting. She appeared to be in her early 40s, wearing a simple earth-toned kitenge dress that reflected quiet elegance rather than luxury. After exchanging greetings, Claudine reached into her handbag and placed 3 scarves on the table. Aline recognized them immediately. They were all her own creations. "I bought these from 3 different shops," Claudine said. She smiled. "Do you know what fascinated me the most?" Aline shook her head. "They all sold out very quickly." Claudine laid the last scarf gently on the table. "The customers never asked which brand made them." She looked directly into Aline's eyes. "They asked who created them." Aline pressed her lips together. No one had spoken to her that way in a very long time. "I'd like to offer you a contract." Aline looked up. "A contract?" "I'm preparing a new handcrafted fashion collection for the East African market." Claudine opened her leather folder and slid a proposal across the table. "If you accept, you'll become the lead artisan designer for the first 12 months." Aline carefully turned each page. Then she reached the section showing the advance payment. The amount was enough to rent a proper workshop and purchase all the equipment she had dreamed about. Hope flashed across her face. Then her eyes stopped on the final clause. "The designer is responsible for covering all production materials and manufacturing costs before receiving the second payment." Aline fell silent. She had no capital left. In fact, the money remaining in her bank account could not even buy a single bundle of weaving thread. Claudine noticed the change in her expression. "Is something troubling you?" Aline remained quiet for a few moments before deciding to tell the truth. "I recently lost all of my savings." Claudine did not ask why. She simply folded the contract closed. "I'm very sorry. I truly want this opportunity. I know, but I don't have enough money to begin." Silence settled over the table. After a moment, Claudine asked gently, "Aline, yes, if you had enough capital today." She paused. "Would you be willing to bet on your own talent?" Aline answered almost immediately, "Yes." Claudine smiled. "Then don't reject an opportunity simply because of your current circumstances." She stood up and handed Aline her business card. "I'll keep this offer open for 10 days. 10 days? Yes. Why? Because I don't invest in people who already have plenty of money." She looked steadily into Aline's eyes. "I invest in people who know how to create value." After Claudine left, Aline remained seated for a long time. The contract she had dreamed of lay before her. The only problem was that the distance between her dream and reality had never felt greater. That afternoon, when she returned to the workshop, she looked at the last few rolls of thread sitting on the shelf. For the first time, she realized she stood before 2 choices. She could continue mourning everything she had lost, or she could begin creating something new with everything she still had. For the first time since losing her savings, Aline felt something besides pain. A tiny spark of hope had appeared, and sometimes a single spark is enough to help someone stand up and begin walking again. Aline Uwimana unlocked the door to her weaving workshop earlier than usual. Inside, only a few rolls of cream-colored cotton, 2 bundles of indigo-dyed thread, and 1 roll of unfinished kitenge fabric remained. She stood silently in front of the nearly empty shelf for a long moment. Never before had her workshop held so few materials. The remaining supplies were enough to complete no more than 2 weeks of work. After that, unless she could afford to buy more thread, the workshop would have to close. Aline gently ran her hand across the old wooden work table, polished smooth by years of use. She remembered the very first day she rented this tiny corner. Back then, all she owned was an old weaving loom her father had left behind, 3 rolls of thread, and a quiet belief that hard work would eventually build a better future. 9 years had passed. She had earned loyal customers and a respected reputation, yet a single signature as a loan guarantor had swept away everything she had built. Just then, Solange Uwera walked in carrying 2 cups of hot tea. You came before sunrise again. Aline smiled. I couldn't sleep at home. Solange placed 1 cup on the table. Have you thought about Claudine's offer? All night. And Aline looked at the few remaining rolls of thread. I want to accept it, but I don't have the money. Solange pulled up a chair and sat down. Do you know what's strange? What? Since you lost your savings, you've kept saying you have no capital. Aline nodded. That's true. But you've never once said you've lost your talent. Aline looked up. Solange continued. Money is only a tool. Your craft is what creates money. Aline fell silent. Those words reminded her of her father. Whenever he sold one of his handmade wooden pieces, he would smile, pat her on the head and say, no one can ever steal the hands that know how to work. She had been too young to understand then. Now she finally did. Around noon, Emmanuel Uwimana stopped by after finishing a construction site inspection. He carried a small paper bag. What did you bring? Mandazi. You always remember. Emmanuel looked around the workshop. The nearly empty shelves told him the situation was even worse than he had imagined. Aline. Yes? If you had to start over today, what would you do? She gave a faint smile. I have nothing left to start with. Emmanuel shook his head. No. He looked directly into her eyes. You'd still have yourself. Aline said nothing. Emmanuel picked up a blank sheet of paper and wrote 2 headings. What I've lost, what I still have. He handed her the pen. Right. Slowly, Aline filled in the first column. My savings, my dream workshop, the rental deposit, my sense of security. Then she paused at the second column. One by one, the words appeared. My skills, my loyal customers, my reputation, my experience, my original designs, my health, my friends, Claudine's opportunity. She stared at both columns for a long time. To her surprise, the second column was longer than the first. Emmanuel smiled. Do you see? Aline nodded quietly. I've only been looking at what I lost, when what you still have is what will shape your future. He paused before saying slowly, people don't make you poor by taking your money. Aline looked at him. They make you poor the moment they convince you that you've lost the power to choose. The words seemed to linger in the room. For the first time in many days, the weight on Aline's heart felt just a little lighter. That afternoon, she carefully counted every finished product remaining in storage. 17 premium scarves, 6 decorative woven panels, 3 unfinished traditional garments. If she sold them wisely, she could raise enough money to begin again. At exactly 3:27 p.m., her phone rang. It was Bosco. Aline looked at the screen for several seconds before answering. Aline, his voice sounded tired. I'm sorry. She remained silent. I know an apology won't bring your money back. That's true, but I'm trying to sell my car. I see. I'll repay you little by little. Aline answered calmly. Bosco, yes? This time I don't need promises. Silence filled the call. What I need, she spoke gently, is for you to begin taking responsibility. Bosco struggled to respond. I don't hate you. She took a slow breath. But from today on, I will no longer rescue you from the consequences of your own choices. Bosco could not find another word. The call ended. Aline quietly placed her phone on the table. Her hands no longer trembled. It wasn't because she had become cold. It wasn't revenge. It was because for the first time in years, she finally understood that loving someone did not mean carrying the weight of every mistake they made. As the sun disappeared behind the hills surrounding Kigali, Aline carefully folded Claudine's contract, placed it inside her bag, and looked toward the old weaving loom. She was happy. She no longer had enough money to build the workshop she had once dreamed of, but she still had enough courage to weave a brand new beginning. That very evening, a simple idea quietly formed in her mind. She had no way of knowing that this small idea would soon become the first thread of an entirely new future. At exactly 5:12 a.m., 3 days later, Aline Uwimana no longer rode her bicycle to the rented workshop as she always had. Instead, she stopped in front of an old house tucked away in a narrow alley in Nyamirambo, Kigali. It belonged to a widow named Beatha Mukarugira, a 59-year-old woman who had once sold handmade fabrics before retiring because of poor health. In front of the house stood a small storage room that had been unused for years. It measured barely 15 square meters. The corrugated metal roof was old, but still sturdy. Betha opened the gate with a gentle smile. You're here even before the roosters wake up. Aline lowered her head respectfully. I didn't want to disturb you, so I thought I'd come early. The older woman looked at the bicycle loaded with a weaving loom, rolls of thread, and several old wooden tables. Are you really planning to start over here? Aline looked at the dusty storage room. I don't have a better choice. Betha shook her head. No. She smiled warmly. You still have the best choice. Aline looked up. What is that? To keep working with your own two hands. The elderly woman unlocked the wooden door. Dust floated through the morning sunlight. The room was not beautiful. It was dark, and the concrete floor was cracked in several places. But to Aline, it looked like a second chance. Throughout the morning, she cleaned every corner herself. She removed the cobwebs from the ceiling. The old wooden table her father had built years ago was placed beside the window. Her old weaving loom stood proudly in the center of the room. By noon, the little storage room had slowly transformed into a modest but welcoming workshop. At exactly 11:06 a.m., Solange and Emmanuel arrived together. Each carried a simple gift. Solange placed a freshly made wooden sign on the table. You'll need something to hang your workshop's name on. Emmanuel carried in a new work lamp. This will make it easier on your eyes when you work at night. Aline looked at both of them, her eyes filling with emotion. Thank you. Solange laughed softly. Don't thank us. You've spent years helping other people. Now it's time to let others help you. Aline remained silent. This was something she had never been comfortable with. For years, she had always been the one giving. Now she was learning how to receive. That afternoon, she carefully counted the remaining materials one final time. 3 rolls of thread, 2 rolls of fabric, a small supply of natural dyes. If she planned carefully, she could produce only 8 premium scarves. 8 pieces, no more. Aline opened her design notebook. She did not choose her best-selling patterns, nor did she choose the easiest designs. Instead, she created 8 entirely new pieces inspired by Rwanda's rolling green hills, the women carrying water at sunrise, and the traditional woven baskets her grandmother had taught her to admire as a little girl. Why take such a risk? Solange asked. Aline smiled. If I have to start over. She looked down at her sketches. Then I want to begin with the very best I can create. Late that afternoon, her phone rang. It was Claudine Mukamana Aline. Yes? 7 day remain. I know. I'm not calling to pressure you. I simply want to ask, have you made your decision? Aline looked around the small workshop, the old walls, the old wooden table, the old weaving loom. Yet for the first time in weeks, she no longer felt defeated. I want to accept the contract. Good, but I still don't have enough capital. The line fell silent for a few moments. Then Claudine asked gently, if I gave you 3 more weeks, could you do it? Aline did not answer immediately. 3 weeks. It was a very short time, but perhaps enough. Yes, she took a deep breath. I can do it. Claudine smiled. I knew I hadn't misjudged you. After ending the call, Aline opened her notebook and wrote across the first page in large letters, 3 weeks. There was no turning back, no one left to depend on, only herself. That evening, just as she was locking the workshop door, she saw Mas Esperance waiting quietly outside the gate. The elderly woman held an old wooden box in her hands. Mom! She walked toward her daughter and gently placed the box into her hands. These belong to your father. Aline slowly opened the lid. Inside were an old savings book that had been closed years ago, a few worn woodworking tools, and a brown envelope. I've never opened it, Mama Esperance said softly. Your father told me to give it to you only when you truly needed it. Aline's hands trembled as she unfolded the letter. There was no money inside, only a handwritten note in her father's familiar handwriting. Aline, if you're reading this, I may no longer be beside you. I couldn't leave behind great wealth. The only thing I truly believe is that you will build your own life with your hands and your kindness. But remember this, my daughter. A good person is not someone who sacrifices everything. A good person knows when to help and when to stop helping. If you lose yourself trying to save everyone else, in the end, both of you will drown. The first tears since the day she lost all her savings quietly rolled down Aline's face, not because she felt hopeless, but because for the first time, she realized that for all these years, she had remembered her father's words about loving her family, yet forgotten the most important part. Never lose yourself. Aline carefully folded the letter, took a deep breath and looked toward the weaving loom, waiting inside the little workshop. The next morning, she would begin weaving the very first scarf of her new collection, and at the same time, she would begin weaving her own life together again. On the 18th day since starting over, the lights inside Aline Uwimana's tiny workshop were already glowing. The steady rhythm of the weaving loom echoed through the quiet streets of Nyamirambo. Her hands moved slowly but confidently, weaving red, green, and golden threads into patterns inspired by Rwanda's rolling hills at sunrise. On the old wooden table lay 7 completed scarves, each carrying its own story. Only one final piece remained before she could deliver the entire collection to Claudine Mukamana before the deadline. For nearly 3 weeks, Aline had barely rested. During the day, she completed existing customer orders to earn enough money for more materials. At night, she devoted herself entirely to the new collection. Some evenings, the clock reached 1:17 a.m. before she finally set down her weaving tools and fell asleep in her chair. Yet, strangely, she no longer felt as though she were carrying the weight of the world. For the first time in years, she was no longer working to rescue someone else. She was rebuilding her own life. At exactly 8:36 a.m., Claudine's pickup truck stopped outside the workshop. She stepped out, looked around the small building, and smiled. "I thought you would have rented a larger place." Aline smiled back. "So did I. And now, this room is enough for a new beginning." Claudine said nothing more. She walked over to the table where 8 finished scarves rested beneath a white cloth. Aline took a slow breath before gently lifting the fabric away. Silence filled the room. Claudine picked up the first scarf. She did not look at the price tag. She did not ask about production costs. Instead, she slowly ran her fingertips across every woven detail. The second scarf, the third. By the time she reached the 8th, she carefully placed it back on the table. "Aline, yes." "I've worked with artisans from Rwanda, Kenya, Tanzania, and Uganda for more than 15 years. Aline listened quietly. "But this is the first collection I've ever seen that tells me its creator has changed." Aline looked surprised. "Changed?" Claudine nodded. 3 weeks ago, you were weaving because you wanted to prove your worth." She smiled gently. "Now, you weave because you already know who you are." Aline stood speechless. Perhaps Claudine was right. Before, every piece she created carried the pressure of pleasing customers, family, and everyone around her. Now, every thread reflected the quiet confidence that her value no longer depended on someone else's approval. Claudine signed the contract right there on the old wooden table at exactly 10:12 a.m. The first advance payment arrived in Aline's bank account. Her phone vibrated. She stared at the balance on the screen. It wasn't the largest amount of money she had ever owned, but it was the first payment she had received in a long time that carried no anxiety and no feeling of owing anyone anything. That afternoon, Aline visited the supplier she had purchased weaving materials from for years. The elderly shop owner smiled warmly. "I thought you'd given up weaving." Aline shook her head. "I only paused long enough to learn an important lesson." The old man laughed. "So, how much thread do you need today?" Aline looked across the colorful shelves. "This time," she smiled, "I'll buy only what I truly need. No borrowing, no spending beyond her means, no living on unrealistic hope." Every decision was made with careful thought. 3 weeks later, Aline's first collection was officially presented at the East African Creative Expo in Kigali. At exactly 2:43 p.m., visitors began gathering around her modest exhibition booth. An older woman stopped in front of a scarf titled "Sunrise After the Rain." She asked softly, "Who designed this?" "I did." The woman smiled. "I don't just see a scarf." Aline waited quietly. "I see patience." Later that afternoon, a business owner from Kenya placed an order for 12 pieces. A boutique owner from Uganda requested a meeting to discuss future cooperation. By the end of the exhibition, every item in the collection had already been reserved. As the event prepared to close, Solange and Emmanuel walked over. Solange grinned. "I counted. There were 37 people asking for your contact information today." Emmanuel handed Aline a bottle of water. "You barely sat down all day." Aline looked at the crowd still walking past her booth. If this had happened 1 month ago, she smiled softly. "I would have called it luck." "And now?" Emmanuel asked. Aline looked down at her own hands. Now I know this came from countless mornings that began before sunrise. Just then, her phone vibrated. It was Bosco. Aline stared at the screen for several moments before answering. Aline, I lost my job. I know, I heard you at the exhibition today. Yes, could I see you? Aline looked toward her busy exhibition booth. Then she answered calmly, yes, but this time. We're going to talk about how you can stand up again, not about how I can keep rescuing you. Silence filled the line. For the first time in many years, Bosco realized that his sister was still just as kind as she had always been. But she was no longer willing to sacrifice her future to repair someone else's mistakes, and neither of them knew it yet. That meeting would determine whether the Uwimana family could truly begin healing or lose one another forever. As the East African Creative Expo was preparing to close for the day, Aline Uwimana noticed Bosco standing at the far end of the exhibition hall. He wore a wrinkled dress shirt, dusty shoes, and looked nothing like the confident man who had once spoken endlessly about his big opportunities. He remained there for several minutes, seemingly unable to gather the courage to walk toward her. After saying goodbye to her last customer, Aline slowly made her way over. You came. Bosco lowered his head. I'm sorry for making you wait. It's all right. The two siblings walked together to a quiet courtyard behind his exhibition center. The evening sun slowly disappeared behind Kigali's rolling hills, covering the courtyard in warm golden light. After a long silence, Bosco reached into his pocket and pulled out a worn brown envelope. Aline. What this? Money. Aline didn't take it. Bosco opened the envelope and carefully removed several neatly folded banknotes. It's only 486,000 Rwandan francs. He forced a weak smile. It's nowhere near what I owe you. Aline looked at the money before gently pushing it back toward him. Keep it. Bosco looked surprised. You don't need it. No, but... Aline answered calmly. What I need right now isn't this money. Bosco remained silent. What I need, she looked directly at him, is for you to stop creating new debts. Those words caused Bosco to lower his head once again. After several long moments, he finally spoke. 3 weeks ago, after you refused to help me, I thought you'd changed. Aline remained quiet. I was angry. I blamed you. I even told Mom you'd become selfish. Bosco took a deep breath, but then, there was no one left willing to lend me money. No one left to repay my debts. No one left to make excuses for me. He laughed bitterly. For the first time in my life, I had to face the consequences of my own choices. Aline listened quietly. Bosco explained that after selling his car to repay part of his debt, he spent weeks searching for work throughout Kigali. Some companies rejected him because he lacked management experience. Others turned him away because of his damaged credit history. Even people who once proudly called themselves his business partners avoided him when they met on the street. I used to think I failed because I had bad luck. Bosco looked down at his hands, now rough from weeks of loading freight. Now I understand. I failed because I always believed someone else would clean up my mistakes. Aline quietly exhaled. Those were the words she had been waiting to hear. Just then, Mama Esperance walked into the courtyard. She had known about the meeting and quietly taken a taxi to the exhibition center. The elderly woman looked at Bosco, then at Aline, her eyes filled with tears. May I sit with both of you? Aline pulled out a wooden chair. The three of them sat together in a small circle. After a long silence, Mama Esperance finally spoke. I've been thinking a great deal. Neither of her children interrupted. I always believed helping Bosco meant protecting him from pain. She turned toward her son, but now I understand. The very pain I kept trying to prevent was the lesson he needed most. Bosco burst into tears. These were not the tears of someone seeking pity. They were the tears of a man finally willing to confront his own mistakes. He turned toward his sister. If you hadn't refused to help me that day, I probably would have kept living exactly the same way. Aline smiled softly. I didn't refuse to help you. Bosco looked confused. You didn't? I only refused to help you the old way. He stared at her. Is there really a difference? A very big difference. Aline spoke gently. If I kept giving you money, you would keep depending on me. But if I help you discover how to stand on your own, that lesson will stay with you for the rest of your life. Bosco lowered his head again. So, do you still believe in me? Aline didn't answer immediately. She watched the sunset spread across the Kigali skyline before replying. I believe people can change, but trust must be rebuilt through actions, not promises. Bosco slowly nodded. I understand. At exactly 8:07 p.m. Just before they said goodbye, Aline reached into her handbag and handed Bosco a business card. Tomorrow, one of our logistics partners is hiring a warehouse supervisor. Bosco accepted the card. You're recommending me? No. Aline smiled. I'm recommending an applicant. If you're qualified, they'll hire you. If you're not, you'll keep searching. Bosco held the card tightly. For the first time, he didn't feel abandoned by his sister. Instead, he felt respected as an adult. 3 days later, Bosco attended the interview. No one knew he was Aline's brother. He answered every question himself, completed every test himself, waited for the results himself. At exactly 4:16 p.m., his phone rang. He had been hired as a warehouse operations assistant with a 3-month probation period. The salary wasn't impressive. The position carried no prestigious title. But it was the first paycheck Bosco would ever earn without borrowing money, relying on family, or chasing unrealistic promises of quick wealth. That evening, he sent Aline a simple message. For the first time in many years, I feel like I've truly started over. Aline read the message, smiled quietly, and put her phone away. She knew Bosco still had a long road ahead, but the most important change had already happened. From that day forward, he was no longer waiting for someone else to rescue him. As for Aline, she was about to enter a new chapter of her own, one where her success would no longer belong only to her, but would create opportunities for countless other women throughout Rwanda. Nearly 2 years after the day she walked out of the bank with only 187 Rwandan francs left in her account, Aline Uwimana stood in front of a newly installed wooden sign hanging above a 2-story building in Nyamirambo, Kigali. Umukio Weaving Cooperative. That was the name she had chosen for the weaving cooperative she built from the ground up. In Kinyarwanda, Umukio means Miss Light. Not because she wanted to forget the darkest days of her life, but because those very days had taught her how to find the light within herself. Inside the workshop, 36 women were carefully weaving scarves and traditional garments that would soon be shipped to Kenya, Tanzania, and Ghana. Some were single mothers. Some had lost their jobs after difficult economic times. Others had once believed they would never have another chance to rebuild their lives. Aline had not hired them out of pity. She hired them because she recognized something she once saw in herself: hard work, perseverance, and the determination to stand on one's own feet. At exactly 10:42 a.m., Claudine Mukamana arrived with 2 business partners from Nairobi. She paused at the entrance, looking around the workshop with a proud smile. I still remember the first time we met. Aline smiled. Back then, I only had a 15-square-meter room. And now, Claudine looked across the rows of weaving looms. You've created a place where many people can begin again. Aline gently shook her head. No, they're the ones beginning again. I simply opened the door. Just then, applause echoed from the back of the workshop. Bosco Nindaisaba walked inside. He wore the uniform of the logistics company, where he had worked for nearly 2 years as a warehouse supervisor. His pace was steady now, and the restless urgency that had once driven him toward unrealistic dreams of overnight success had disappeared. In his hands was a brown envelope. Aline. She turned toward him. Bosco placed the envelope on her desk. This is the final payment. Aline opened it. Inside was a bank transfer receipt along with a handwritten letter. Bosco smiled quietly. I've paid back every single franc. The workshop fell silent. Aline looked at her brother, then smiled and gently shook her head. No, Bosco looked confused. You still owe one thing. What? You owe yourself a thank you. Bosco stood speechless. Aline stepped closer. I'm not proud because you paid me back. She smiled warmly. I'm proud because you earned every franc yourself. Bosco lowered his head, his eyes filled with tears. For the first time, I understand what it feels like to hold money I earned with my own hands. Aline placed her hand gently on his shoulder. Father would be proud of you. Bosco could no longer hold back his tears, but this time they were no longer tears of helplessness. They were the tears of a man who had finally regained his dignity. That afternoon, Mama Esperance visited the workshop as she often did. She no longer brought food to force her children to take breaks. Instead, she quietly sat in one corner, teaching new employees how to fold each scarf properly before packaging them for shipment. One of the younger women smiled and asked, "Are you the director's mother?" Mama Esperance smiled gently. "No," she looked toward Aline. "I'm the mother of a very brave woman." After a brief pause, she's added softly, "And I'm also a mother who finally learned that loving your children does not mean doing everything for them." Aline happened to overhear those words. She turned toward her mother. Their eyes met. Both women smiled. No more apologies were necessary. Some wounds are never healed by words alone. They are healed by the quiet changes we choose to make every day. At exactly 5:31 p.m., a young woman in her mid-20s knocked on Aline's office door. "Miss P. Aline?" "Yes, I just received my very first paycheck." She hesitated. "I wanted to thank you." Aline smiled warmly. "Don't thank me." The young woman looked surprised. "Why not?" "Because you earned it. You worked hard. You learned. You refused to give up." The young woman lowered her head. "If you hadn't given me a chance." Aline gently shook her head. "Someone once gave me a chance." She smiled. "I'm simply passing that opportunity on to someone else." As the sun slowly disappeared behind Kigali's green hills, warm golden light poured through the workshop windows and settled gently across the weaving looms. Aline stepped onto the second-floor balcony and quietly watched people walking through the streets below. She remembered the morning she had stood inside the bank holding a statement showing only 187 Rwandan francs. That day, she truly believed she had lost everything. Now she finally understood. What she lost that morning was money. What she found afterward was infinitely more valuable. Confidence, healthy boundaries, self-respect, and the freedom to choose the direction of her own life. In my opinion, family should always be a place where we find love, but love can only remain healthy when it is accompanied by responsibility. Sacrificing for the people we love is a beautiful thing, but sacrificing until we lose ourselves helps no one. Sometimes the greatest gift we can give those closest to us is not carrying them forever, but believing they are capable of standing on their own. 6 months after Umukio Weaving Cooperative expanded into its new workshop, the steady rhythm of weaving looms once again echoed through the streets of Nyamirambo, Kigali at exactly 5:36 a.m. Like a familiar melody welcoming a new day, orders from Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania continued to grow month after month. Yet what made Aline Uwimana happiest was never the increasing revenue. It was seeing the women who had once felt hopeless smiling with pride as they received paychecks they had earned through their own hard work. Bosco continued working at the logistics company as a warehouse manager. He no longer talked about getting rich overnight. Instead, he patiently saved a portion of every paycheck, determined to one day open a small business using only money he had earned himself. Mama Esperance changed as well. She no longer quietly solved every problem for her son. Instead, she encouraged both of her children to take responsibility for the choices they made. One peaceful weekend afternoon, the family gathered beneath a blooming jacaranda tree in front of their home to share a simple meal. There were no more arguments about money, no more unrealistic promises, only gentle laughter and the kind of peace that had been earned through difficult lessons, forgiveness, and personal growth. In my opinion, kindness is one of the most beautiful gifts we can offer another person, but kindness must also be guided by wisdom. When we constantly rescue people from the consequences of their own decisions, we may believe we are helping them, while in reality, we are often preventing them from growing. Loving your family does not mean sacrificing every dream, every ounce of strength, or your entire future. A healthy relationship exists only when everyone accepts responsibility for their own life. What I admire most about Aline's journey is not that she built a successful weaving cooperative. It is that she learned how to say no without losing the kindness in her heart. That is a healthy boundary many of us forget to protect. If this story has given you something to reflect on, take a moment to ask yourself, are you truly helping the people you love become stronger, or are you quietly carrying the weight of their lives for them? If this message speaks to you, leave the word boundaries in the comments and share this story with someone who may need to hear it today.